Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Over the Horizon podcast. I am joined today with an old friend. We have a lot in common, particularly our geekiness for wearable technology. Chuck is he's one of the best in the business. So I'm joined today by Chuck Hazzard. He's an entrepreneur and wearable expert. Chuck is currently working with Heads Up Health. We have that in common, the leading connected health platform being used for remote patient monitoring, precision medicine, and individuals seeking to achieve peak performance. Chuck is also an advisor to several companies in the health and wellness sector. Chuck, welcome to Life Over the Horizon, man. How's it going?
Going well. It's good to get on your podcast, and let's do it.
So, Chuck, tell me about where I find you today.
I'm in Vermont.
Okay.
It's, yeah, Central Vermont. We're just up the river from Dartmouth College, which a lot of people know
Oh,
about it.
very good. What a beautiful place. And you're a
Yeah.
native New Englander?
Yes, I was born and bred in the great state of Maine. Spent my time in Central Maine and on the ocean, Booth Bay Harbor. Um, I've moved around a little bit, not a lot. Mainly stayed in New England. Spent some time in Colorado, but ended back here in Vermont.
What lit your interest in wearable tech?
Uh, I mean, early on, I had a curiosity. I got into running. I was always fairly active in hiking and stuff, but into running and wanted to be able to measure like my distance I ran and stuff in training. And
Sure.
so I got in early with, some of the early polar watches with a chest strap, and then pedometer tied to your shoelaces,
Mm-hmm.
attached to shoelaces. And then as time rolled on, along the way, I met a guy who'd gone to Colby College. He was starting a company that allowed you to upload GPS tracks to the web. And I
Oh,
thought,
very
well,
cool.
that's interesting. It was called motion based, and so they didn't have any devices at that point. Interestingly enough, they just had the concept. And I had a bunch of handheld Garmin devices for tracking stuff while hiking. Um, and so I started uploading tracks. I would carry a Garmin handheld when I was running so they could get the data. And as time went along, they approached Garmin and said, "Hey, are you guys going to be ever releasing something with a GPS you could strap to your wrist?" And sure enough, they were. So over
When they
20 years
released
ago,
that computer that you strap to your wrist?
yeah, it was the original Forerunner. And so when they got the first units, I guess they were past prototypes, but they were working devices. They sent one of the original Forerunner watches, and they also at the same time had a bike computer they sent.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to bike commute to work at my day-to-day job, and so I started using those. And then I think it was probably only a few years later they bought Motion Based. Garmin did, and that became Garmin Connect on the web, the original
Ah,
Garmin
okay.
Connect. So we had because there weren't any mobile phones back then, like the
Right.
iPhone. So that kind of whet my appetite, and then over time I got uh, introduced to like at one of the early HRV companies that allowed you to test your recovery at home. It was a transceiver you put in your early iPhone into the speaker jack, and it was called Ithlete out of the
Oh yeah, I
UK.
remember. Yep, I had
Yeah,
one of those.
yeah, you put on a coated polo
Mm-hmm.
strap, and yeah. So them, and then got in early with Zeo Sleep out of MIT, which is one of the first sleep companies. You wore a headband on your head, uh, and they went out of business. Unfortunately, they were ahead of their time, and so I kept getting all these opportunities to test devices, and so that kept going on. Testing the Whoop for them early on. Met that team, and then ended up working for Oura Ring. So my journey continued from there.
And I think it was when you were with Auras when you and I first met,
Yep,
and started to move on from there. So
yeah,
Chuck, so you started as a user, as I did. Now
yep,
I had that same problem. It's the same addiction. I found myself working for Polar,
yep,
the heart rate monitor company. Now I
yep,
started working in a division that was not heart rate based. It was with a thing that was called TriFit. It was this fitness assessment
yep,
community. and we're working in physical education, but all of a sudden I have access. And at the time, I was still a university professor,
Right.
and I was teaching my students to measure their heart rate with two fingers on their carotid artery.
Hmm.
And then I found a heart rate monitor, and I'm like, oh my God, this is, to continue to teach this is like telling a NASCAR driver to measure their speed by counting telephone poles around the track. It's just ludicrous.
Yep.
Um, and this was some of the real early tech. Again, we had cell phones, we didn't have smartphones.
Hmm.
Um, we had, internet connectivity was still through a dial-up modem, pretty much. We were just starting to move past that. We are starting to get some broadband into our homes, um, and you slowly watch the transition from having to do all the processing in the device to where the wearable started to share the processing responsibilities with the smartphones,
Hmm.
which really changed the game. It really brought things along. So if that's where you started at a personal level, what do you use today and why?
That's a tough thing because working for Heads Up, I'm responsible for the integrations in the wearables
Mm-hmm.
strategy. So I'm usually wear a lot of different things. Sometimes I run out of real estate depending on what the development
I'm the
team's
same
doing.
way. I get it. I get it.
So most of the time I wear an Apple Ultra on my uh, left wrist, just because I think it's one of the best rounded devices
Really.
for tracking everything. I mean, and they, again, this is one of the things that's happened. I mean, Apple was mainly interested in health with, over the time with their Apple Watches. Um, but in recent years, the last two especially, they started adding a lot of running dynamics, which, I don't really care a lot about that stuff, but, um, you know, it's gotten better. And then one of the things with the Ultra model of the Apple Watch is they have, like any Garmin or whatever, it doesn't, you don't just say start a run, it just starts right off,
Really.
running. You can delay the run until you push it again. So Apple was always
So
trying to make
there's a
it.
lot of intelligence built into it.
Well, yeah, well, the Apple is always trying to make things easy, and so if you said, okay, you actually select outside run, it would go 3, 2, 1, go.
Go. Yeah.
'Cause they didn't want waiting for the satellites and all that stuff. They just want to make it easy. But that's not what most sport watches do. But anyway, that's what they did, and so they started adding a lot of running stuff. And I'm past the racing part of my life, so it's more about just health and wellness. And so I think it's a good rounded watch. I mean, my other one I wear a lot is a Garmin, um, because I think they also do a very good job. They started as a sports watch company, but they've over time been adding a lot more health metrics. But the one thing they haven't added is 24/7 AFib tracking.
Okay.
They can do it. They've got a study where they used Forerunner 945s, and it was accurate enough, you know, but they haven't taken the next step from that study they did.
So let's talk about this AFib now. One of our mutual, I would say, love. It's a love for me is
Hmm.
understanding and using heart rate variability measurements.
Hmm.
Um, I learned about HRV when I was with Polar back in the day. We were doing on the wrist processing, and we had a couple white papers come through from Finland talking about, because they had these features called own zone and own index and
Yep,
own recovery, which were all HRV based.
right.
And frankly, this is probably 1997, 98 range. And I had finished up my graduate work in the mid 80s. 86 is when I finished. I'd been a university professor in between that, as well as keeping my fingers in elite athletics. But I see this thing called HRV. I see these white papers because one of my frustrations, Chuck, is that when we taught exercise prescription, all of the equations that we taught used estimate down from maximal heart rate.
Mhm.
Okay, and then you have this equation 220 minus your age, or there were moderate variations of that.
Right.
But my experience with that is that got about 2/3 of the population. When someone come in, you would do that. Okay, I'd miss a third of my people. I'd have to adjust zones down the road because of this.
Mhm.
So you want to do a more accurate estimation of your heart rate zones, but they always started at max and worked down. And then I
Right.
saw this thing with heart rate variability where this is basically they were able to estimate threshold, anaerobic threshold, which is my preferred prescription point. That's where I work from. Um, and this was pretty cool. I'm like, wait a minute. So I don't need to George Jetson someone off the back of a treadmill in order to get, to start my exercise prescription process. By the way, I was talking to a friend. She's much younger than you and I are. She could be our child. But, and I used that reference, and she's like, who's George Jetson?
I
And,
actually did go off the back of a treadmill
oh,
in a VO2 max test. I thought, they said you're done. And of
yeah,
course you're like, loopy because you've run to the, way past your max.
right.
So I stopped. I didn't even walk, and they
Oh,
hadn't stopped, and I went right up the back.
well, listen, I've been part of people going off. And again, I'm getting ready to do a podcast on VO2 Max on our other podcast that we're getting ready to launch. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
But yeah, it just is not, it is not inviting. And you know
thank
what? If you're an elite athlete, you'll do anything. You know,
yeah,
you wanted me to lay on this table and you can drive nails in my hands. Okay, go ahead and do
yeah,
it if it's going to make me better. So
yeah,
we'll get on a treadmill and we'll go until or we'll throw up after a Wingate test or whatever. We'll do it. But the general public won't.
right.
It's an absolute maximum barrier to entry. They will not do it.
Yep.
So this is one of the things I really like about wearable tech that integrates HRV into a lot of this estimation. I mean, this is where some of the good algorithms are really coming from. And that's what Polar had. Chuck,
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine. In fact, I have conversations with people every day.
Hmm.
Um, okay, I want to get fit. I want to really get into this. And we're not talking about sport based, but this would apply to sport based too. This
Right.
is general public, civilians. And what should if I'm going to get in shape, what should I get? I don't know. I cannot work out anymore unless I have a heart rate transmitter on.
Hmm.
Um, and it's being recorded and I'm seeing it. Now, I don't know if I haven't decided if it's good or bad because, back in the day when we didn't have such good light-based heart rate monitors,
Hmm.
and you had to have that transmitter on, shoot, if you forget to pack your transmitter on a business trip, you don't work out. Um, and 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 it was a mental block for sure. But now we have multiple devices, whether it's an Apple Watch or an Aura Ring or whatever. We have multiple ways with the emergence of this thing that's called photoplasmography, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But I don't know how you train without a heart rate monitor. Do you agree with that?
Well, it depends what you're trying to do. I mean, if you just, if you're a serious athlete and you're training by zones, you probably do need a chest strap.
Sure.
Especially if you're in track and field kind of training.
Oh, it
Uh,
applies to all sports.
yeah,
They
no, it
track
does.
and field, yeah, track and field sports are just the easy ones. When I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
at Ohio State, we took Polar, the soccer jerseys they have where the transmitter fits up in the back of the
yeah,
scapula. I had
yeah,
16 of my wrestlers wearing
right.
those, and we were it was really good. I mean, but it took work. I mean,
Yeah,
I had to have 3 shirts per athlete in the program, which was
yeah.
very expensive, but
Well,
we
yeah,
figured it out.
yeah, but certain sports, chest straps don't work well because
Right.
you can't put them tight enough. Like wrestling, it would
Yeah,
not stay on. But no, I think for a lot of people, like the vast majority of people that are into exercise, um, there are certain watches now that are super accurate for all but maybe
I agree.
CrossFit, or things like that.
Yeah,
Um, but the Apple Watch certainly is one of the leaders. The Google watches, the Pixel watches, are unbelievably accurate.
good.
Um, They don't even, you can't even connect a chest strap, so thank God they're accurate. The newest Garmin sensor, the fifth generation, is very accurate, other than maybe gravel bike, right, or CrossFit or weightlifting. But
You know what I've learned on that, Chuck, is that rowing,
mhm.
anything where you have intense grip,
Yeah,
kettlebell work, rowing,
wrist flexion
where,
too.
where extensor digitalis, the muscle that runs down the back of your, if that's being flexed for a long time, you just have to rotate your sensor to the inside of your wrist.
Yeah, but I've used I've got a Concept 2 rower, and I've used Apple Watch, Garmin Generation 5
Does good.
on a lighter watch and a Pixel watch, and with a chest strap, and they're spot on. Even doing intervals on the rower.
What's the most computers you've ever had going at the same time while you're doing an exercise?
Uh, Probably five.
Really?
Uh,
I've
yeah,
only
well,
been able to get
just
to three.
well, carrying, like running outside and steady state usually testing, but
Sure.
carrying a watch like with your hands, with a chest strap connected, just to collect the
Oh,
data.
but listen, with the so for the audience, there's two ways to measure heart rate, blood flow, a lot of these cardiovascular
Hmm.
characteristics. One is with EKG, electrocardiogram. So
Yep,
when you're wearing a polar strap, it's picking up the signal from your heart electrically. By
yep,
far the most accurate way to do it. It's the
yep,
best way to do it.
yep.
But with the development of a technology called PPG, photoplasmography. So whether it's a ring like an Aura ring, or your watch like your Apple Watch, or your Now Watch, or any of
Mhm.
these other wearable devices on your wrist, it's shooting light into across the skin, and it's looking at your blood flow in the capillaries. Well, from this, they can very accurately estimate. Is it fair to say estimate, or is it accurately to actually measure?
They're estimating. They're not.
Yeah,
It's not a direct measurement, and I would preface this by saying the wrist is one of the worst places to measure anything
right.
because of the movement. I mean, because a simple thing, because they're estimating it. It's not uncommon, even occasionally, some of the best Garmin's, they get cadence lock. So basically, the watch can't distinguish the motion, what they're called motion artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the acceleration of your arm through space, that motion. You get light interference with your actual cadence of what is your step count, per minute as you're running. Sometimes it'll confuse the cadence with your heart rate and actually lock into that. And so you go back and look after the fact, say, interesting. It said I was 180 beats per minute, and that was my cadence at that point.
Yeah, yeah. There's some devices I used to get that when I was riding my bike. It's like all of a
Yeah,
sudden my heart rate matched right up with my cadence.
right, right.
Yep.
So, but it's not a good place to measure because it's not a direct measure like EKG. But even with a chest strap, in the wintertime, when it's dry air,
Yeah,
if you don't have it moist enough, and you can't keep it moist enough, a lot of
right.
times even chest straps are
Yeah, you'll
inaccurate.
lose it. So
Yeah.
back to PPG for just a second, and we started with red light sensors. So
Hmm.
all the new ones, but now we're seeing lots of different lights come into play.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Red lights, green lights, white lights. And what we're starting to see, the ability to estimate blood pressure, we're seeing the
Hmm.
ability to estimate blood sugar in some of
Hmm.
these devices. We're starting to see. Now, I have low trust in those two measurements right now,
Yep.
but I think it's coming. I think this is on the verge.
Yeah, I know there's some diabetics that test a lot of devices, and there's some coming out of like China, and they found that if their glucose is steady state, they're actually quite accurate.
Okay,
But if there's a rapid change in glucose, like they eat some, these are type 1 diabetics, the peaks and going down fast, if
they
they
can't
do,
see it.
it just can't keep up with it. So,
Yeah,
so I don't know
yeah.
if there's any value in that case.
You know what, Chuck? HRV. So for the audience, HRV stands for heart rate variability. And when we're measuring your heart rate, we're measuring in tenths of a second. So if your heart's beating 60 beats a minute, we're getting 1 beat per second. At max, if it's 180 beats a minute, we're getting 3 beats per second. So that's in the light of things, it's relatively easy. So when we're measuring heart rate variability, we're measuring the difference in time between heartbeats. Okay. Now we go to a millisecond measurement. Okay. Which is much more difficult. And again, Chuck and I have been watching this for a long time. You get a device, you're like, because I don't know about you, but I'm regularly going back and checking and just double checking against my EKG. I just finished up a workout a little bit ago. I did 4 sets of Concept 2 ski ergs with some CrossFit strength in between. Number one, my optic polar heart rate monitor does not do well in that situation, because if I'm swinging a kettlebell or swinging a mace or doing that, it wants to slip around. It doesn't do good. So I've just gone back to the chest strap now. And a lot of people will complain about the chest strap, and it's just not comfortable or whatever. Well, what I tell people, and what I've said, and I've been talking about this for 30 years now, Chuck, is that when you learn to value the data that the chest strap produces, you'll wear the chest strap.
Yeah. A lot of people, they might have experience with some of the early Garmin or Polar chest straps. Those weren't comfortable, especially for women. But now the H10 and H9 and whatever, they're all very, very comfortable.
Yeah, they're great. They're great.
Yeah.
So heart rate variability. Let's talk about this for just a little bit. We're starting to see this as an emerging KPI, key performance indicator. I'm working on an educational piece for Heads Up, and I actually wrote some stuff this morning, and I talked about so there's a professor down at UPenn. His name is Martin Seligman. He's the father of Dr. Martin Seligman. Excuse me, Dr. Seligman, but father of positive psychology. And when he was the president of the American Psychological Association, in his acceptance speech, he made the point of psychologists are really good at helping people go from -10 to 0. He said, why don't we work on helping people go from 0 to 10? And this is where positive psychology came from. And as I look at wearable tech, I see this as an opportunity. And as we look at KPIs, health KPIs, whether it's health or performance, either one, right now I know of one variable that is indicative of status from an Olympian down to the day you die. And that's HRV. When you die, your HRV will be 0. Okay.
Right.
And for my elite athletes, my Olympic level athletes, I'm looking for HRVs greater than 100 milliseconds. We're not going to deep dive into the whole HRV thing. I think it's a bit much, but that it's the basic measurement that you get from most devices that they call HRV. I want that above 100. And so this is the reason I like HRV. This is the second thing I recommend. Get a heart rate monitor, start tracking your workouts, learn to avoid zone 4. That's the first thing you have to help teach people. Zone 3 is a great place. Zone 5, you have to touch occasionally. But zone 4, there's really no value in it. And by the way, if you're competing, you'll do all your competition there, but you don't need to train there.
Unfortunately, that's where a lot of people spend their time.
Exactly. And they spend their time there. And the reason they spend their time there is, one, they feel it. That when you get ready to go do something, you feel it. What you're feeling is hydrogen ion and lactate. Okay, that's what you're feeling, which is doing two things. Number one, your body is kicking into a sympathetic fight or flight state, and it's saying, looks like you're being pursued. Something wants to eat you. I'm going to make you feel happy as much as I can. So you get a dopamine kick, and you get a huge cortisol hit, trying to keep you alive. That's what it is. You pay the price for the cortisol You pay a huge price for the cortisol.
Right,
There's no benefit that comes from 4 that is not in 3 without
right.
cortisol.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of that. That's why you wear a heart rate monitor.
Yeah, well, it's a well-known fact that a lot of runners that aren't working with good coaches, they spend their easy days running too hard and their hard days not running hard enough.
Right, right. And they're all in that
So,
space. They like that they like that dopamine kick. That's what
right.
they wind up tuning to. Oh, by the way, 95% of the people that make the decision to train for a marathon never get to the starting line. Okay?
Hmm.
That's because they get injured. You get
Yes.
injured because you're not adapting to your training. You're
Hmm.
maladapting. When you're in that zone 4, it's a huge maladaptation zone, and it's an invitation to injury. Oh, also, by the way, if you're measuring HRV, what you'll see with your nighttime HRV measurements, you'll see a boost in HRV after zone 3 work, and you'll see a drop in HRV after zone 4 work. Pretty simple.
Hmm.
I mean, this is why these two tools. Those are my 2 recommendations to people. Do you ever
Right.
recommend something else?
No, but one thing though, you mentioned over 100 milliseconds. I know of several world-class athletes that their normal HRV is 25
Wow.
milliseconds. And again, there's some genetic mix there. So I tend to look at the trends, how HRV, I mean, especially over time, you can
Sure.
look at it's going to go down for everybody. But you can do things to keep it at the same level as when you're 20 if you take the right strategies. And so that
Yeah.
is a good indicator of longevity.
And you know what? This is where the sports science comes into play, Chuck, that you do have those examples. But what we saw, so we were working with wrestlers and we were working with an
Hmm.
elite team that was going to the national championship.
Yeah,
And to make all American in wrestling, you essentially have to win 5 matches over 3 days.
yeah.
I had several very good wrestlers with low HRVs that in a dual meet situation were devastatingly effective. They were great, but they only had to win 1 match. I take
Yeah.
that same wrestler and I put him in the national tournament where
Hmm.
everybody's good. Okay, everybody's good. I mean, from the first round to the finals, someone's good.
Right.
I mean, it's the top 10% of the entire sport. And then to make All American, you're the top 10% of the top 10%. Um, and if you didn't have the resiliency to get through those 5 matches, if I didn't send them to nationals with a high enough HRV, they didn't have the resiliency necessary to win 5 matches.
Hmm.
Um, and we got to where we could predict whether someone could make All American based on their HRV measurement the first day of the tournament. So,
Hmm.
and I'm seeing this in the sport a lot. There's some teams that are really good. The best teams in the sport are paying attention to this. So let me
Right.
go back. Let me go back to the question. Um, what else do you recommend to people when you start looking at wearable tech and what we're talking about? What do you think goes into it? So you've got your Apple Watch. You use your Ultra. Does Apple provide enough of a dashboard for you to be able to make decisions, or do you have to run your Apple through your heads up?
Well, yeah, you can. I mean, with Apple, the difference with Apple is they chose not to make a good app. I mean,
Okay,
Apple Health is disjointed crap. But because it
it's a
is
big file
Apple,
cabinet that just gets
yeah,
stuffed.
right, it's a repository. But because Apple is Apple, there are all kinds of apps that you can use. So there are several that I use that are, you know, turn the Apple Watch experience into something closer to like a Garmin or a Polar or a Whoop or whatever. Pick your wearable of choice.
What apps do you like?
The top ones that I use religiously, and why I use multiple ones, I don't know. I just like to test
Well,
out.
that's just us. You know,
Yeah,
that's who we are.
Bevel is one. Bevel. Athletic is another one, and Onvy out of Germany is another one I like.
Okay.
OMVY. So I use those. I use Training Today, which is sort of like Garmin's body battery. It gives you sort of indication of what your theoretical capacity is. and I find it to be, pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Finding.
The concept of body battery for the audience, I think it's important to note that Garmin, so one of the better HRV companies in on the world is a company out of Helsinki called Firstbeat. Um,
Yes.
so they've so by the way, the Firstbeat founders were ex-Polar employees. The
Well,
or
actually, there's an even more interesting story. The actual CEO of Firstbeat, when he was doing his dissertation for his
Mhm.
PhD, Polar, uh, they provided money, right, for some of the research. And so that's the real Polar connection for him
Mhm.
originally. And actually, the Aura's original chief science officer was on the review board.
Nice. Well, Finland is this little, Oulu, Finland is way up in northern Finland. It's like 100 miles from the Arctic Circle. I
Yeah,
got a chance, and Polar's based in a little town called Kempeli, Finland,
yeah.
which is about 10 miles from Oulu, and I got a chance to visit. Now, unfortunately, I visited on December 22nd.
Well,
Okay,
nothing wrong with that.
it was 3 hours of daylight, Chuck.
Yeah, I
Okay,
know. I've been there the shortest day of the year and the longest day of the year.
it was brutal.
Yeah,
But Finland, I'd love to go to Finland in the summertime sometime. But yeah, so there's a lot of great tech that comes out of there, and we see so Firstbeat has great algorithms. They've got great data, and Garmin bought their algorithms from Firstbeat, which I thought was an excellent move on Garmin's part.
yeah.
That
I knew they
they
were
had a
going
great sensor, but you got to
to.
get that algorithm in on top of it.
Yeah, they were paying licensing fees, and I figured, and this was a couple of years before they actually announced they were buying the analytics side of the company, but they had over 30 features on some of their Phoenix watches, and they were paying licenses to Firstbeat. So it
Right.
made sense for them to just buy the company, and they
Sure.
did. Ultimately.
Well, listen, that the wearable tech side of Garmin is a rounding error compared to the rest of their business. So,
Yes, yeah.
but they do a good job. I have several military friends, elite military groups that love that Garmin product.
Yep.
And you've got the Polar Grit, another elite product, and
Hmm.
and the Polar line, the Garmin line, all that. I'll tell you, I don't share your love of Apple. Um,
A lot
and
of people.
maybe it's just listen, I haven't discovered it yet. I haven't figured out how to make it work for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, the downside of it, one of the downsides of Apple is the battery life. They've made a decision. They want you to nurture the device, right? So you get addicted to it. So you have to charge it every day. It's like taking care of a dog, right? So or your phone.
Right.
Uh, the Ultra can go 3 days more or less. It's more towards. I don't think it's mil spec like the Grid X and the high-end Garmin watches, but it's pretty tough. I wouldn't wear it if I was still, actively competing. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have runnable maps. So if I'm going out on a really long mountain adventure where I want, Garmin's advanced features to tell me how many climbs I have left,
Yeah.
what's the length of the climb, mapping. If it's a course that I haven't been on, then I wear a Garmin for that. I would not wear an Apple Watch for anything serious.
Yeah. Yeah. So the podcast is called Life Over the Horizon. Okay. And I started this podcast, Chuck, because I went to the National Strength and Conditioning Association meeting up in Baltimore in July.
Hmm.
And I largely saw the same stuff we were doing 20 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe putting a little sharper edge on it, but not it was not cutting any better than what our stuff did. Okay, so that's what's so important.
Yeah.
So the reason I started Life Over the Horizon is I want to paint a vision for practitioners.
Hmm.
What's it going to look like in a decade? What and so we don't know. This is us, guessing here, right? Um, what do you think? Now, listen. What we've seen is we saw the development of GPS tracking. We can have, and this has evolved into Strava. And
Hmm.
Strava, you can go get on your bike and do a climb, and your Strava will tell you just where you rank on that particular climb. And this is against professional cyclists, professional runners. Everybody's in the pool on this thing, which is a really cool feature.
Yeah, it's
Um,
a gamification. Yeah.
and but so so let's talk about the fitness professional or the health professional. One of the reasons we're working on the Heads Up Health HRV education is because I believe medicine is evolving. Functional medicine is now starting to step out of what we call standard of care. When standard of care means as a physician, you can only do what insurance will pay for.
Hmm.
Okay. Functional medicine has said, okay, we're done with standard of care. We're not doing, but there's people out there that will pay for an added level of service, and we're starting to see this start to feel a lot like athletic prep. Um,
Hmm.
and we're dealing with people 0 to 10, not 0 to -10, and it's a
Right,
huge
right.
shift.
Yeah.
So I see this as evolving. I personally believe, I went into my physician. I have got a great doc. He's a functional medicine doc. He's been a friend for 30 years. He's been my doc for a decade.
Hmm.
And I went into him the last time and I said, Eric, when are you going to start paying attention to my HRV measurements and my CGM measurements instead of a lab test you do 1 to 4 times a year? He said,
Hmm.
he says, I don't think I'll see that before I retire. Okay. So if that's the case, 10
Yeah.
years from now, what do we think that functional medicine environment or the sport performance environment looks like as it relates to wearable tech?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you just mentioned HRV. I mean, I know from my own case, I got COVID back in September, and my HRV's been in the tank ever since then. I wonder why. I have
Interesting.
not fully recovered from that COVID
Right.
incident. Um, I'm starting to climb back out of it now, so I've turned the corner coming up. But so there are simple indicators that wearables track that a doctor can get very good insight into whether something's going wrong with their client, patient, athlete, right? And you're right. If you treated every patient like an athlete and wanted to be the best they could be as far as performance, I think everybody would be healthier, right?
Mm.
Because
Do you
indeed is trying to
do you
keep them
think
alive.
the doctor's plugged into an app that sounds an alarm? Listen, I've seen the COVID thing too. I've had COVID 3 times.
Yeah.
2 of them I was completely asymptomatic.
Hmm.
The first one back in the day, I mean, I was the only reason I knew I had COVID is I eventually developed this thrombosis on the top of my toes. They called it COVID toes back then.
Yeah.
And I went back and looked at my data, my training data. So I train on devices that measure watts. So I'm usually recording workload against heart rate. So
Hmm.
watts per heart rate, watts per heartbeat is one of my KPIs personally.
Right.
Um, and there was a week where I just tanked. And now
Hmm.
it was a week after I'd spoken at a conference in Florida that everyone got sick from. And this is 19. This is at the beginning of COVID. And
Yeah.
so I was able to go back and retrospectively look, and I'm like, oh, HRV dropped, respiration went up, body temperature went up.
Hmm.
That's a pretty good. And now we've seen that as pretty predictive of some type of a viral infection, and
Yeah.
it's pretty. Do you think a doctor in 10 years, someone wears an Aura ring or they wear some type of a bracelet that's measuring, or their Apple Watch even? I'm not sure if Apple Watch's HRV data is there yet.
Yeah.
Um,
It is. Yes.
okay, but that an alarm goes off and they contact you and say, "Hey, looks like you." And let me back this up with a second. So when I was working with the wrestling team, this is 15 through 18. We take, you're allowed to travel. We have 10 starters in the lineup. You're allowed to
Hmm.
travel with 16 guys because you got to have workout partners and so forth. And we were picking the guys to travel one weekend. And I said to the coaches, I said, you need to take 2 guys at 58. And
Hmm.
they're like, at 57, excuse me. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, he started showing signs. So I measured HRV on these guys every day.
Hmm.
And we were seeing the deep measurements of HRV. We're seeing HFLF and these other things. And I said, he started this morning. I think he'll be symptomatic in 2 days. He's got
Yeah.
the flu. He's just
Hmm.
not symptomatic yet.
Yeah.
2 days later, boom, popped. He sniffed all over the place. We had the other wrestler, and the coaches looked at me like I was a witch doctor.
Hmm.
Um, they're like, "How do you know this?" And I'm like, "It's in the data. It's there."
Right.
So do you think that's what happens? Is that the consumer that may not be a total nerd like you and I are on this, but are just Joe Bag of Donuts out there trying to get through life, that has put a wearable on, um, and the doctor calls him and says, "Look, I think you probably need to move away from your family a little bit, or because I think you have a viral infection."
Yeah, maybe not at the viral infection level, with a wearable, but I mean, this is one of the things that Heads Up is doing is, taking a lot of data inputs that clinics can now use, and clinics can set up alerts on Heads Up for different things depending on their clients' goals.
Sure.
It could be a weight loss clinic where you're looking at weight, maybe CGM data, and you get alerts. You can set thresholds when you want to see the alert, and it can tell you, look, Joe's not looking good. He's got, again, his temps up, respiratory rates up, HRVs in the tank, sleep was very disruptive. Have a nurse call or a health coach. Call
Yeah.
Joe, find out what's going on. And, then you might say, okay, get him in here. And I'll tell you a side story about a startup company a while back that was using wearables, and they still are to this day. This company's called Baby Scripts, and I helped them with promoting their um, solution in the very early days so they could get traction with investors and whatnot on LinkedIn. And what they did, they would send a kit to a expectant mother. So like a
Mm,
weight scale, blood pressure cuff, a few other things, Withings products. And they made a dashboard. This is even before Whoop was even around. They made a dashboard with stoplights. So the same thing
mm,
Whoop ended up doing. And so they, every morning, the doctor or the nurse would come in and look at this Baby Scripts dashboard, and they could say, okay, green, green, green. These, sort it, whatever. All these mothers are looking good. We got a yellow here. Give them a call. Have the nurse call. And then if it's red, get the woman in here. And the thing is with, having a baby, it's flat fee. And so what they could show the doctors that do their pilot studies is if we can keep the women healthy and at home and not in the office, there's no reason to pull them in here if you don't have to. And so this is how data can, even off consumer wearables, can be extremely powerful to provide the right care at the right time for your patient. And otherwise, you have all this data, these data points outside of the clinic visits, blood
I
pressure,
agree.
weight, all this stuff. It's happening every day. If you tell the person, for instance, you've got hypertension, I have it, with alerts on Heads Up, they can say, look, Chuck, you haven't taken your blood pressure in a week. You need to take your blood pressure every
Or it
day.
might be time for a visit to revisit what your prescriptions
Medication.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, we see that your blood pressure's been trending up, which does happen in the winter months. So we may need to increase your diuretic, at least through the winter. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, so we have CGMs, continuous glucose monitors. So we see them advertised on TV. Personally, I think when you're measuring blood sugar, you're really late in the game. Okay,
Mhm.
I was at a keto conference down in Dallas, Austin, Texas, 2 summers ago, and they have a continuous keto monitor, so
Yeah,
it's measuring ketones continuously. I'm talking to the two principals from that company. They're experimenting with continuous insulin monitors. Okay,
that's tough, but yeah, yeah.
this will be okay. You want to do something about diabetics. You start to pay attention to insulin and ketones, and you really have a story to tell. So,
Yeah.
I believe in 10 years. I don't think it'll take 10 years. First of all, I believe we'll have we have real ketone monitors now. Okay, so we can do that now. The insulin, I believe, is coming.
Oh yeah,
Um,
all these things. Everybody says, you can never do glucose off a PPG signal, but somebody will figure it out.
they're figuring it out. And you know what? Along the way, you listen. You may need a hammer and a screwdriver. Everything doesn't need to be a nail.
No, no,
Um,
no. But that's the
so
thing. If you can, if somebody said, and I agree with you that for type 1 diabetics, they should focus on insulin more than glucose for many reasons.
Yes.
Because you have a lot of type 1s that will just get those glucose pumps and they'll go eat a chocolate
Oh,
cake. And they're wrecking their heart with all the insulin.
well, they're
They're,
wrecking their cellular system. I mean, it's
yeah,
going in and impacting at an
yeah,
mTOR level, and it's
yeah,
brutal.
yeah. But anyway, but if somebody came, I was type 1 diabetic, and they said, we've got this new device you can wear on your wrist or whatever, or a patch you wear that lasts 7 days or 14 days, whatever, and it does ketones, glucose, and insulin, but it's only 80% accurate. That's probably good enough. Uh,
Absolutely.
so,
Absolutely. There's a thing called the Pareto effect, the 80-20 rule that most people may
right.
know this by. And I think this is one of the benefits is that right now 100% of the patients that go into the doctor's office, the doctor walks into the room with the same expectations, which is really pretty low.
Hmm.
If we're able to screen the 80% of the population that can be taken care of with a phone call or a text or an email, so that that physician can focus on that 20%, you're not
Hmm.
taking up their time with the 80, first of all, so they have more time to work. They're able to do a deeper dive. They're able to get deeper in. I love the book Metabolic. I don't know if you've ever read this yet or not. And it's talking about the interface between big medicine, big pharma, big food, and
Hmm.
the disconnect that these bureaucracies have created. And it goes down to I'll think about the name of the author here in a minute. He's at UC San Francisco. Um, but He talks about the fact that when he walks into a patient's room under the existing standard of care system, he literally has his hand on the door to exit as he walks in the room because there's so much pressure. 15 minutes with a standard of care doc is really a long time. When
Right.
I go see my doc, we're in that room for an hour. I mean, we're having extensive conversations, and you
Yeah.
can't do that unless you screen yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And they can't even look at their patients because they have to do it in 15 minutes. They have to enter stuff into Epic while they have the appointment.
Yeah.
So they're not even
And
looking at
and who no offense, but
you.
having you stand on a scale
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
then have taken your blood pressure in a white coat environment,
Hmm.
those measurements aren't as valid as the 80% measurement that we discussed that we're working with the thresholds on CGM, CKM, CIMs.
Hmm. Yeah.
That this is what we're starting to learn and
Yeah.
starting to see. So Chuck, we've talked about the fact that one of the things we expect to see is an integrative approach between daily living
Hmm.
and working with your medical or fitness professional.
Right, because the functional integrative practices, I mean, most of these they're cash pay, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the idea is that everybody will end up with some chronic diseases, but these don't happen overnight.
No.
So really having the healthcare provider care for you over the long term and make sure you have as few of those chronic diseases as possible. And if you do develop them, is manage them, with regular devices at home, and not expensive hospital visits,
When it's
every.
a drip and not a flood.
Right, right,
Yes.
exactly. So, and that's a problem. Like you talk about diabetes, is you go see your doctor typically in a standard healthcare setting. They'll measure your glucose with blood lab. They'll look at it and they'll say, "Oh, your glucose is high," and then a year later, come back, "Oh, it's a little higher. Oh, it's a little high." Until you get up to the point where you're diabetic, say, "Okay, we're going to put you on metformin,"
Yeah.
and they do that for a while, and then lo and before you know it, you're on insulin. You know,
And they just love. Listen, I'm diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. I'm an insulin resistant human.
yeah,
Um, I constantly say I'm genetically ready for the zombie apocalypse.
yeah,
So when food is not available, whatever, you skinny little shits are going to die first. Um, Us type 2 diabetics, we are very efficient in food storage and energy storage, and
right,
and it becomes a genetic advantage at that point. Um,
right.
But so we just have to be careful of the environment that we live in.
Yeah.
So Chuck, so we've talked about this. Now let's drift back a little bit towards HRV.
Mhm.
So, and I'm gonna geek out here just a little bit. So the HRV number that we refer to in all these devices, this is referred to as RMSSD, root mean square similar differences. Um, and this is what we call vagal tone. It's an indication of the activity of your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve, it runs from your brain to your organs and basically moderates that process. Okay. When you're under stress, your vagus nerve shuts down, your organs shut down because you're in survival mode. When you come back and you begin to recover, your vagus nerve becomes more active, your organs are more active, you're in recovery mode. Okay? Now, there's I personally, when I work with someone, I start with RMSSD. Okay, let's find out where you're at. If
Right.
if I get the data back and they're 75 or above, I really don't worry about rest of the HRV measurements. If they're
Mhm.
50 or below, I then want to do what I call an LFHF analysis.
Mhm.
So, so for the listeners, RMSSD is a time domain analysis. Low frequency, high frequency are called frequency domain analysis, and the math on this is crazy. But LF is essentially an indication of your sympathetic state. HF is an indication of your parasympathetic state. So my next step, when I have someone with low RMSSD, I want to do an LFHF analysis.
Mhm.
Now, so there, not everybody, Aura doesn't do that. Aura just has RMSSD.
Yeah. I mean, one of the best tools I've found for that is HeartMath.
Love HeartMath. One of
Yeah.
my favorite treatment tools too.
Yep. Oh, yeah, if anybody wants to learn, I mean, they've done some of the most interesting research on HRV, heartmath.org.
By far the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Chuck, do we have them integrated into Heads Up?
No, they do have an API now. They
Okay.
just has in demand. We've had a few clinics that have asked for it, and then, when push came to shove, they decided maybe they didn't need it. So,
So if
uh,
there's a practitioner out there that wants to start to dive into this and wants to do this next level analysis, so one of our mutual friends, Jason Moore, down at Elite HRV, which has now become
and
Spreen, um, if you want to do HRV and you've not done anything up to date, usually one of my first recommendations is go buy a Polar H10 transmitter because you
mhm,
kill two birds with one stone there. You get heart rate data. Their app runs on your smartphone. It
yeah,
is free. Polar Beat is free. And that, by the way, integrates into Heads Up Health
yeah.
through their
Well, that's what I tell people. I mean, seriously, one of the best wearables made is your smartphone
yes.
because you can connect a chest strap to it. So,
And and you know what? Even if you don't want to buy a chest strap, Spreen has or Elite HRV, they have a tool where you can use your fingertip on the camera of the phone. Which again, the standard deviation of error is going to be much greater than what you get with the chest strap. But you know what?
uh,
It starts to give you a picture.
yeah, no, and that's the thing is if Marco Altini in his HRV for Training app, put a plug for him. He's done a lot of, comparisons of like using an Apple Watch while stationary, doing a
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness exercise, pulling the RR intervals, which Apple lets you pull from their API off the phone, compared to a chest strap and finger things. It's all the same.
It's
It's
pretty
within,
good.
yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely within a statistical range that we
yeah,
consider accurate. Um,
yeah. And yeah,
now,
as you said, Elite HRV is integrated with Heads Up also, so it's great for spot checking. Again, if you're going to do that, get up in the morning, go to the bathroom, find a quiet place, same time of day, same
yes,
environment, and if 30-second check even works well. 5 minutes is
yep.
better, but
Again, it starts the process. Now,
yeah.
I want to stay. I want to stick with elite, but I want to come back to. I want to come back to measurement processes.
Hmm.
If a do we? So if someone does an elite HRV measurement with their phone,
Hmm.
do we integrate LFHF That doesn't report on the phone. You've got to upgrade to the computer app to get that. Do we tie to that in Heads Up, or do we need to have them go to the app, go to
Yeah,
the dash,
we just only hold the HRV value, the single
the
number.
RMSSD?
Yeah, the one at the end. We don't get the LFRF. Um,
But one of the other partners that we have is Cardio Mood.
mhm.
Um, and Cardio Mood also measures LFHF,
Yes, while you're sleeping. Yeah.
which, and so let's talk about that for just a second. Preferably, my preferred mechanism for measuring HRV when I'm is nighttime sleeping HRV.
Yeah.
Um, that's my preferred. And for the audience, there's really three times that you can measure that it be. That, you don't want to measure HRV randomly. You
Hmm.
want it at a given point in time so it's comparable.
Hmm.
So Chuck just talked about the morning measurement. I completely endorse that process. First thing in
Takes
the
a
morning,
lot of discipline, though.
it's a lot of discipline. The hassle factor is high. There's no doubt about it.
You've got
And
pets or a spouse or anything like that, kids,
it's
forget
brutal. It's brutal. Yeah.
it won't happen.
Now, and getting up and putting a wet transmitter on first thing in the morning just is not motivating at all.
But I'll tell you something that interesting that I've used the Whoop strap. They actually transmit the full HR profile. So if you put a Whoop strap in the broadcast mode, you can use that with Elite HRV, and it works
Okay.
great.
So Whoop does that. Like I said, if you're exercising or if you're doing anything with exercise and you don't have a heart rate monitor, go to Amazon, order a Polar H10,
Hmm.
and begin to use the Polar Beat app. That also, now not all transmitters will measure HRV. They have to be broadcasting and measuring at a level higher than what some do. So they're not universal here.
They have to broadcast the full HR profile over Bluetooth to use with a
And
phone.
at greater than 200 megahertz.
Yes. Yep.
Yes. So
And so people know if you went in for a professional actual test with, $10,000 hardware, it's like 1,000 hertz now.
right.
How great.
And by the way, the new heart math transmitter
Mhm.
significantly boosted their transmission rate, their measurement and transmission rate. So that got even better.
Yeah.
Um, so so if I want to go to, what's the easiest way to get LFHF, Chuck? Well, if I said what's the easiest way to do it, what do you think it is?
I think say heart math. I mean,
Okay,
or you get, Lead HRV and get the pro version,
it's
subscription.
$9 for the
Yeah.
pro version,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
can
it's
get that.
worth
And you
it.
see that.
It's a great app, and and again, you've got the ease. But going back to time of measurements, we mentioned for convenience, overnight is one of the best. And again, Marco Altini comparing his Aura data to morning measurements over the long haul, it's the same.
Lines up very nicely.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, you're going to have different levels, but the trends are the same.
But the convenience is, there's a world of difference. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just no
So then
two ways about it.
you want to look at how often is the sampling overnight. Are they taking the average for the night, or it takes the average and it's
Well,
continuous?
you can get peaks and averages. So let's be
Yes, you
clear
get
there.
the peak, but the peak is not as meaningful. Because that could be noise. I mean, it could be an anomaly. But yes, or in their testing, which was internal, not third party tested, but I think they were like close to 90% accurate with a chest strap
Okay. Yep.
overnight across a bunch of different people in different age groups. Um, the Apple Watch, if you turn on AFib uh, tracking 24/7, they take samples every 15 minutes. So not perfect, but not bad.
And for the listener, let's just go back. So what's the challenge with Apple Watch with HRV? Yes, it does measure it. It measures it accurately, but it doesn't have a mechanism for standardizing time of measurement.
No,
So
yeah. What if you just put on an Apple Watch, while you're sleeping, you're probably going to get anywhere from 3 to 7 measurements overnight, depending on how active you are. So unless you've been diagnosed with AFib, or you lie about having been diagnosed with AFib and say, yes, I have, and turn on AFib scanning, then they attempt to take a measurement every 15 minutes 24/7 because that's how they do the AFib scanning.
Mm-hmm. But there's nothing there to compare. This is what's so important about HRV. It's
Yeah,
about comparing epochs. Um,
yeah,
and so I have three. So with my wrestlers, some of my wrestlers, I just could not get to do morning measurements. They just wouldn't do it.
yeah.
But they learned when they came in the wrestling room, they put this strap on, they went over and laid down on the edge of the mat, and did a first beat. No, we were using the Russian group.
Yeah, a lot of pro teams and college teams do that now. They don't even they found they couldn't get the athletes to do it, so they
Right.
do it when they show up in for
My
training.
high cognitive guys, my
Yeah,
my real high cognitive guys bought into it lock, stock, and barrel. Everybody else, and wrestlers are never, they're never confused with geniuses.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But
so
anyway, but yeah, so most of the devices are continuous. Garmin, Polar. There are some anomalies like Polar's. They lean on the early part of the sleep, like the first 4 hours. I'm not sure why they do that, but it tends to usually line up with Aura and Garmin and everybody else. Whoop puts more weight on the late sleep. They tell you that it's because of the shortwave sleep is where they want to track it, but sleep is not accurate sleep staging on any wearable.
well,
So
remember, sleep for the audience, sleep is a fake number.
yeah,
It's a generative number. HRV done well is an actual measurement.
yes,
Sleep
yes, sleep
estimates,
was
body batteries, these are all. I use the term fake number. That's probably not fair to
yes,
them, but it's a
that's
generative number.
a lot of the fun metrics that wearables show you, like recovery scores,
Yeah,
sleep scores, body battery, stress is one of the worst ones. They're based on other measurements that aren't even direct measurements. So, like for instance,
right.
stress. Everybody's showing stress now, and they base it on a combination of what heart rate's doing and HRV. During the day, neither one of those is necessarily all that accurate. It's an indirect measurement. So unless
And
you put an EDA sensor on the device, no, do not report stress.
so for the audience, I want to put out a buyer beware warning. Just because a device says it has HRV doesn't mean it's accurate. And
Right.
so I can create a scale that you
Yeah.
step on, and the a number comes up on the device. But that number could be anywhere from 50 pounds to 1,000 pounds.
Right.
Okay. And and there are many HRV devices out there on the market, particularly cheap price. I know in my social media, every once in a while, I'll start getting kicked ads for this particular thing that measures, and you can buy it for $29.99. Um, there's definitely a buyer beware. From my standpoint, if I
Mhm.
want accurate HRV, I start with Aura. That's where I go. That's my favorite tool. Um, I look at a Polar H10 transmitter with an additional app. I think those are very accurate measurements, whether
Yep.
it's Elite HRV or someone like that. I love HeartMath. That's a great product. The accuracy is excellent.
Mhm.
Who else do you put into that elite class, Chuck?
Oh, I mean, well, it's no, it really comes down to chest straps, and I don't think anybody else for sleep is got, you know, the accuracy. I mean, they're good. I think they're good enough to follow trends.
Mm-hmm.
So I would state that. I mean, I don't think you need 100% accuracy for sleep HRV as long as the trends are reasonable. And I think they
I'm
all
with you
do.
on that.
So even
Okay.
if one's higher than another consistently, like Garmin's always higher than Aura, they still follow the same, trend.
And if you're unusually low, and Chuck, I've got, listen, we're now a little over an hour, and I want to wrap this up to a certain degree, but I'm curious about how you react. So I have several friends that are very high performing physicians. They are the smartest people I've ever seen in the world, and they run these amazing practices, but they've got
Yeah,
HRVs of 17 to 20.
yeah. But
What's the first thing you think when you hear that?
I don't think there's a problem that if that's what it's always been. I don't know how long they've been measuring, but
I see.
somebody their whole life could have been lower. I mean, there are some people that, for whatever reason, their HRV is low,
Now,
and that's part of their.
I'm not going to let you off the hook on this one for just a second, because I think it's important that if your HRV is 17, don't accept that. you can
No, I
constantly start a process of trying to work it up because you're always wanting to work away from zero.
yeah. But again, there's this one guy I can think of that's a European top rower. Then he was a masters volleyball player, masters age volleyball player, sand. And his HRV, he said, has always been in the 20s.
Hmm.
So go figure. And this is the guy's
Well,
been checking for a long time.
I listen. This is where. So usually my third recommendation is heart math, either
Mhm.
heart math inner balance. Beginning to, I have a very good friend. He was a teammate of mine, Dr. Ron Garbo. He's
Mhm.
now a pain management doc out in Newport News, and
Yeah,
he uses a lot of HRV work, and he calls it intentional recovery.
right, right.
We have intentional eustress, positive stress. We do exercise, and most of us don't do enough. We can do
Mhm.
other intentional recovery, meditation, gamified meditation, data
Book,
feedback meditation, like with heart math,
yeah,
and
watch
just
cat
carving out a
videos.
part of your day and putting it in.
Yeah, no, and I've told some people, if you're stressed, watch cat videos. Seriously, their heart math just goes perfect, coherence every
Oh man,
time.
that's great. Chuck, listen, I really appreciate you giving us your time today. When I made the decision to do this, I knew you were going to be one of my early guests, and you are. Um, we will continue. If people have questions,
Yeah,
so this gets posted on YouTube, Chuck. There will be links to social media, but people will watch it on YouTube. Put comments in, ask questions, or you can email either one of us. You
yeah,
can get me. Go to LinkedIn. You'll find us both there. Send notes. Would love the feedback, and if you have questions, let us know, and we can do a little ask me anything sometime.
yeah. No, that sounds like fun. Those are the funnest. Sure.
Chuck, have a great day, buddy. Groundhog Day's 2 days away.
There you go. Take care.
I'll see ya.